what you might call a grand slam of World Press, Pulitzer, and the Robert Capa Gold Medal for his work on the migrant crisis enveloping Europe and the Mosul Offensive. Prior to that period, which was marked by his close and ongoing relationship with the New York Times, he had spent 9 years at the Associated Press. As he says, he got used to every few weeks packing up his gear, heading off to wherever the next big story was breaking. The coronavirus stopped all that. No one was going anywhere. And so he turned his cameras on his hometown of Moscow. Like so many other great cities of the world, suddenly a very different place. Ladies and gentlemen, to talk about what grew out of that personal experience and what it meant to him, please welcome Sergey Ponomarev.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Whitney and Stephen. That was remarkable work, and yeah, I believe that's evening of Panoramas today. So let's go through. My name is Sergey Ponomarev, and I'm a freelance photographer, and I've been doing my freelance work for nearly 15 years. I won a Pulitzer Prize for the reporting on a refugee crisis in Europe in 2015, and then 3 World Press Photo Awards and the Robert Capa Gold Medal. And throughout my career, I've seen dozens of wars and natural disasters and cataclysms, and I was always on the road, rushing somewhere and chasing the news or in a search for a new story. And I constantly focused on the news happening in the Middle East and wars in Gaza and Lebanon, and I was among a few who were allowed to work in Assad, Syria, and I was during the war with Daesh in Mosul. And I followed refugee crisis and refugees from the Middle East coming to Europe in 2015. And I'm still following their news and lives. And I estimate that roughly before 2020, I was only 60 days at home, and the other 300 I was traveling. And it was a miracle that one of the most significant events in the 21st century, the coronavirus pandemic, happened when I was in my hometown in Moscow. And I think it was a historical moment that we can compare with Chernobyl or September 11, and the pandemic actually changed the lives of every inhabitant on the planet. And so, as I said, I'm a photojournalist, and I carry my camera to the new spot, whatever it means, because my mission is to be eyes of society. And I go to the front line to show things to people who can't be there. And during the first pandemic lockdown, journalists in Moscow could move freely without restrictions. And most of the photographers were trying to get to the COVID wards and the hospitals where the front line was. There was the fight for the lives with this invisible enemy. But I decided to go in a different way. Previously, in my stories, I always photographed drama that was reflected in the eyes of my subjects. But, this time, there were no eyes. The pandemic exposed humanity acupuncture points and uncovered accumulated problems, forced a rethink of our values, and put modern life on pause. And empty streets of all cities in the world became a visual metaphor of everything we have gone through since the spring of 2020. You know, Moscow is a megapolis of 20 million inhabitants, a melting pot that one can compare with London or Rome, a city that never slept and choked in traffic. And you can remember a movie, A Good Day to Die Hard, with Bruce Willis, who constantly was stuck in Moscow traffic and used an armored vehicle to pull cars off his way and to move around. And sometimes I had such an idea too. And in my photographs of empty streets of Moscow, it's so strange to see the traffic lines and a city without cars. So every day I walked 10 to 20 kilometers around my hometown to get to know its real inhabitants. Buildings, monuments, parks, and road junctions. And these buildings have been witnesses to many wars and epidemics and fires. You know, Moscow was burned down during 19th century, just before it was surrendered to Napoleon. And these buildings have seen tsars succeed each other and regimes collapse. And every day I discovered my hometown in a new way. It's a fantastic feeling when you can see things that you never paid attention to before. You can see details of the buildings and understand how architects took inspiration from the old buildings to make new ones. And I'm a visual person, and I realized that I will start this project I started to see details of every corner, and I realized that I will do a black and white architectural project. So in my photos, you can see monuments interact with each other and understand the invisible mesh of details that make it as a city. Our attention is always concentrated on things that move our daily life. Cars and people and static objects are just decorations. And now these decorations were observing the latest dramatic event in the life of our world. Whenever I stopped, I looked around, turning my head from left to right, trying to observe this complete emptiness. And I realized that this should be a series of panoramas that will emphasize the feeling I had. I never shot such panoramic images before, and even more, photographers now have to shoot more vertical pictures following this format of smartphones and social networks. So in a way, this project was my rebellion against these strictures. And during my vagabond adventures in the empty city, I reminded myself things that was happening in these places before. Like the fact that Nikolskaya Street was the main festive street for all fans during the World Cup in 2018, and now it looked like full of ghosts. Or the Red Square, which we know for demonstrating Russian military strength with tanks and nuclear missile launchers rolling along the ancient fortress. But on a victory day, it stood empty, and only helicopters and jet fighters flew overhead while citizens were sitting locked in their homes. Then there is the Novy Arbat Street, Moscow Broadway, that is used by Russian rulers to travel from Kremlin to their residences. You can see these generations of skyscrapers. These buildings in the front are the most famous books on Novy Arbat, and they sit next to Stalin-era skyscrapers on the right and modern-era skyscrapers on the left. And the caryatid of the Hotel National that was preserved after Soviet regime authorities changed the hotel facade. And now this decor element humbly looks at the next disaster that has befallen people. The Cathedral of the Assumption and the Ivan the Great bell tower inside Kremlin Fortress echo Moscow city towers on the left as the ancient and the modern business centers of Moscow. The prominent landmark and the soul of Moscow, the monument to the famous favorite Russian poet Alexander Pushkin. Once he said that the folk trail to his monument will never overgrow. But during pandemic, he stood alone in complete emptiness. And I have to admit that I also was afraid of this invisible and unknown enemy. I had the same fears as millions of other people. The fear of infection, fear for your relatives, and the fear that nothing will be the same. Sometimes I just wanted to lock myself and stay at home and stay in bed. But this project helped me to overcome this. You know, when you go to war, you always have people around, your colleagues and fixers and drivers, and you can share your emotions and fears. But during that time in Moscow, I was walking alone. And I looked into my girlfriend's eyes when I was leaving our home, and she looked at me with fear as if I was going out to the unknown. And I looked at her when I came back, and she was cautious to let me in. And everyone had to cope with uncertainty and psychological stress facing the unknown. Someone made it with help of yoga, someone with help of cooking or studying, and I had my empty mascara. The deeper I immersed myself in the emptiness and silence and the granite and metal and wood, the more acutely I felt the eternity and fragility of living Moscow. Yeah, the city will be the same after we are gone, but we are the ones that can preserve or destroy the legacy we have inherited. We are alone determine how our time will reflect and fit into the architectural mosaic of history. And people sometimes ask me, why there are some people in your pictures? Wasn't it easy just to wait a little bit or use Photoshop? But I think the emptiness feels even sharper when it's just you and the other person on the street that was swarming before. A lonely couple at the embarkment, policemen and couriers on the bikes rushing to those locked in their apartments. All of them are the components of the great empty. And another thought haunted me while working on this. I had, after all, seen empty cities before. I saw Fukushima after tsunami, I visited Pripyat in Chernobyl, I saw homes completely destroyed in Syria, and I saw Mosul in Iraq. Life either never returned to these cities, or it was never quite same again. And I thinking about this now, when I go out back into revived and once again busy streets. And I think we've been lucky. Our cities were put on a pause for several months, but now the play has been pressed again. And the great emptiness and beauty of my capital remain in my photographs. And every one of us can feel this emptiness with our own meanings, stories, memories, and hopes. Thank you very much, and I will be happy to tour anyone around my exhibition. It's just right there in the farthest corner from this spot. And there is also a book at the store. Thank you.